as we sit here, the dimension of silence, which is inner stillness. Simply to notice that there is, apart from the words, there is silence. In other words, the words are the foreground, the silence is the background. And when you notice that there is silence in between and underneath the words, that moment of noticing is the arising of presence in you. The moment you notice silence, you become still inside. It's only because you became still inside that you can even notice that there is silence apart from the words. The strange thing is, thought cannot even notice that there is silence, because thought is noise. So if I ask you the question, can you find out if there is silence in this room apart from the words? If you want to truly answer that question, you have to go, yes. But while you went, you were not thinking. There was an alert presence. Then, of course, when you said yes, that was thought again. That's all right. So whenever you notice, and not only as we sit here, because you may already have noticed, and if you have, that's a clear sign that presence is arising in you, you may already have noticed that there is quite a lot of silence around here, even if you step outside. Especially if you've come from the city, you may notice that strongly, that there is, or in your room, it's very silent here. And if you did notice that, it means, how could you have noticed it if you not, for that moment at least, it's enough. There was no thought. If there had been thought, continuous stream of thinking, which is still the destiny of many humans, their fate, you would not even have known it, or without knowing it, you would have felt uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And you would have jumped to the TV set, if you have one in your room. By the way, I recommend strongly that you don't use it. You would have jumped to the TV set and put it on. It's a noise. And you didn't even know why you felt uncomfortable. But if you noticed it, who noticed it? Not you, the mind-made entity, the egoic entity. No, something deeper in you, the presence, the stillness in you, noticed it. Otherwise you would not have noticed it. Someone was visiting Thailand. He told me he was visiting monasteries, and he climbed up this hill a long way from any city. On the hill is a beautiful monastery. He climbed up this hill. He arrived at the top of the hill, entered the monastery. Silence, absolute silence. Monks walking around. He said, "This is paradise. I'm going to stay here." And suddenly, cheap loudspeakers started coming on that were hidden in the trees, with the Thai version of kind of pop songs. He said, "This cannot be." And he ran to a monk and said, "What is happening?" He said, "We're expecting a group of lay devotees from Bangkok, and they become very uncomfortable when it's totally silent here. So to make them feel better, we put on that music." So my friend, the pilgrim, went on through. It wasn't paradise. It never is external, if you look for it externally. So the people from Bangkok complained. Don't like it, it's just... There was so much mental noise. became uncomfortable. So one of the things here during our retreat, essential, absolutely, is to notice silence, not only while we come together here, also when you walk from one building to another, when you're in your room, or going for a walk in nature. Notice the background of silence, because in nature you have some, beautiful, gentle sounds, and you hear those, you pay attention to that, but you also pay attention to the underlying silence. Then that dimension arises in you. And you can walk there as a walking field of stillness, alert stillness. And no longer walking there, carrying the heaviness of your mind, the noise factory, and the heaviness of your personal history that you need to think about while you're walking in nature. Your problematic life situation, the dilemma of your existence. There's no life situation that is not problematic, and if it's not problematic right now, wait a little and it will turn problematic again. Because whenever you're only identified with that level, that dimension, everything is problematic, and if it's not now, it'll become problematic. I gave the example of the honeymoon. The honeymoon is not problematic, and a little later it turns into problematic. The great job that you just got with a big paycheck is not problematic, and a year later you become sick with stress, or there's so much infighting that it becomes hell. Or in many ways in which situations can turn around and become problematic again, and that's the one damn thing after another. And that's the truth of Buddha, who said, wherever you go, whatever you do, whoever you meet, whatever situation you go into, whatever place you have, whatever anything, it's dukkha, suffering. If it's not suffering now, just wait. And of course he talked about being lost in the world. So our practice here, to notice the silence. And noticing is enough. Then thoughts come back. And then again there's more alertness. So you'll notice as you're here a continuous shift probably between thoughts arising and presence. And if it's 90% thoughts and 10% presence, that's great already, because we're in an evolutionary shift. So the new is arising in you. But as presence arises, the ability to witness thoughts so that thoughts don't overpower you completely grows. Before, in the absence of presence, every thought has you completely in its grip. And the emotion usually comes with it that goes with that thought. And then, as presence arises, comes the ability to notice your thoughts in the same way that you notice an external noise. And then you may notice, there's a lot of noise up here. The noticing comes always from presence, from the stillness. So when you notice that your mind is noisy, wow, it's noisy. How do you know that? Because you have some access to that dimension that is unconditioned. The consciousness that is unconditioned, which is present. See, we remember that a bit. The unconditioned consciousness that is presence. And from there you can see what your mind is doing. And the mind then is no longer a serious business. You can even start to smile at what it does. It's mechanical. After a while you look through the main strategies of the mind, how it tries to get your attention and so on. There you are again, there it is. The mind becomes depersonalized. Before, the mind was me. The mind and the accumulated memories that make up my personal history was me, and I walked around with the burden of me, with my unfulfilled history, unfulfilled and unfulfilling, not enough. And whatever strange thoughts were associated with that, life passed me by. Unfair, it treated me unfairly. I missed it. Whatever thoughts you have about your personal history. Something went wrong in 1984. It shouldn't have happened. That's why I cannot be happy now. Or you carry an identity based on an unpleasant experience that somebody did to you. You survived, and that's wonderful. Yes, it was dreadful, because as long as humanity is unconscious, totally identified with mind, they do many dreadful things. So you cannot come onto this planet without experiencing dreadful things. Some are more dreadful than others, and you suffer. There's no child that doesn't suffer. And yet, to build an identity on the basis of past pain is a dreadful limitation. To have a painful story that is the story of me, and needing to think about that, because you can't think about it, gradually you might even forget, and need to talk about it continuously, and then see yourself as this or that. You have a label for it. No matter how tragic it was at the time, and some awful things have happened, are happening at this very moment in certain parts of the planet. No matter what it is, the fact is, you survived. And yet the mind used it because it's always looking for a stronger sense of self. It's looking for an identity. It's looking for a stronger me. And it can use something like that, something very bad that happened to me, or the other way around. Something very bad that I did to someone. So that's guilt. You identify with something that you once did. And you wouldn't do it now, but there you didn't know any better. That's why it happened. Unconsciousness. So if you identify with unconsciousness, either that came through you or what other unconscious humans did to you, there you create a heavy, painful sense of self. A story. But everybody has their story. Even if there's not one big traumatic event in their lives, they have their own story, the personal story, their identity. And how liberating it is to see that it is no more than things that happened. That ultimately that is not who you are. You are not the accumulation of those memories or emotions. That's there, yes. So as presence arises, you recognize that was never who you are. Your personal history has its place, undoubtedly. It happened. You may have old photos to prove it. It really happened. And the photos at some point begin to fade. Even I haven't yet reached old age, but even I have photos from my childhood that are already beginning to fade. They're going yellow. The story is dissolving. Wouldn't it be strange if photos faded more quickly than the human body, and after 10 years you open your photo album and there's nothing left? Wow, that feels good. And yet there is a dimension in every human that was never really touched by what happened. The eternal, timeless state of consciousness that is presence. Who you are underneath the form that your life takes, your life situation, as I sometimes call it. The dilemma of your life situation. You mean other people also have a dilemma? I'm not the only one. Surely no life situation can be more problematic than mine. No story is that fulfilling. If you look behind even those who in the eyes of the world have made it, success, fame, wealth, if you look behind the facade, you see there's unhappiness, sometimes greater than other people, because they still think they can make it. They have made it, and it hasn't freed them. So here we are, the dimension of form as this retreat center, this gathering, the people, including also your mind, the thoughts that come, the emotions also, comes and goes. No form lasts that long. Before you know it, this retreat is over. First you looked forward to it, and then it's there. But since the world of form is governed by time, which is ultimately an illusion, just as form is ultimately an illusion, life is like an express train, it never stops, you're on it, and so one event goes past, and there's the retreat, here it is. It's over already, it's Sunday, and it's time to go home. If we could truly see reality, external reality, so-called, we would be shocked, deeply shocked. By truly see, I mean the way we perceive it is as if the world around us were solid. The buildings, the structures, economic, companies, corporations, political, even the people have their job and their pension scheme and everything is in place, and it's very solid reality. And it's sometimes another example of solid reality is that death is a taboo even now in Western culture, because it would show you that human bodies are not solid, they dissolve continuously around you. But you mustn't look at death, it's forbidden to see dead bodies. No, just death. And when it comes to people, they react as if they never knew that such a thing existed. He died. And nobody told them that it was some abstract truth in the head, distant, everybody does, okay, everybody does. But they live as if they're not the case at all. It's sometimes helpful to travel to India where they don't have a taboo and you see dead people openly. And it's the same here, they're dying everywhere, but they're shut away. So look, pretend that nothing is happening. Another way why India is so wonderful to go to, and its spiritually beautiful experience, is that the world of form is less predictable there. Here you have timetables and the trains run and everything, you can plan your trip. And there, it's, what's going on? Nothing goes as planned, and it's miraculously, in the end it works. As one Indian man said to me, we live by grace. He was talking to an Israeli person. The Indian man asked the Israeli man, what do you live by? And the Israeli man said, we live by guts. and then he asked the Indian man, said, oh, well, we live by grace. And there you see that the structures of the external world are not that stable after all. And of course it's the same here, it's an illusion, the stability is an illusion. And sometimes a structure that looks so permanent crumbles. Whether it's the communist system, or whether it's a building, or you lose your job, or your corporation suddenly, the multi-billion-dollar corporation collapses. With your pension plan, everything. What we see is a kind of frozen view of the external world. If you saw a more realistic perspective, a speeded up version on film, you sometimes see it how a flower opens, they speed up the film, and you see the flower coming out of the soil, opening, withering, and disappearing. And if you could see in that way a human existence, baby, and then running around for a few years, and then growing, wrinkles come, and like a fruit or a flower that goes out. God. And then just a little bit longer it would take before so-called heavy physical objects would also dissolve and become dust. This room, if you saw it speeded up, first the bodies would go, and then you have to just wait a few more seconds. And then gradually you see cracks appearing, things start falling down from the ceiling, and then the ceiling collapses, and then there's only dust left, and then the wind comes, and So you see, everything is already in the process of dissolving. Continuous birth and death. And humans are stuck in there somewhere and say, this is reality here. When you see that fact in the sublime teaching of the Buddha called impermanence, you're astonished when you see it. And you allow it to be. It is liberating to see that. To the egoic entity, it's a dreadful thing. Don't be so negative, don't talk about these things. And yet, if you allow that, and you see how forms come and go, how the entire universe is that play of forms, and everything dissolves as that form, something in you feels good, feels very peaceful to see that. How is it even possible to see it? To witness that? I talk about that briefly in Stillness Speaks, the book. If the entire world were blue, you would not see the color blue. You need something that's not blue so that you can recognize blue. If everything were impermanent, you wouldn't even know it. How can you know impermanence? Because there's something in you that is not impermanent, but it has nothing to do with your form. The form is impermanent. And that's the beauty of death. It frees that which was trapped in the form. And that is the beauty of watching and allowing the impermanent nature of the world to be. Even to witness death puts you in touch with the deathless, formless